Take a look at the scale of military aid that the United States has given to Ukraine as it's fighting off Russia's invasion. Now, since the beginning of the invasion in 2022, the US has provided around £53 billion in military aid. That's more than Europe and the UK combined. Their aid amounts to around £51 billion over the same period. Now, the US aid includes 76 tanks worth just under £500 million. They've also provided more than 350 armoured fighting vehicles worth more than £525 million and around £1.2 billion worth of air defence systems as well. All right, well, let's bring in our military analyst, Sean Bell, for more on this. I mean, Sean, laying out there just how much has been spent, a lot of kit, a lot of expensive kit. What impact is it going to have on the fighting's decision to pause the aid?
Yeah, good afternoon, Kamali. I mean, on the ground, over the winter period, the Russians have been on the front foot. It's not the ideal time for fighting. There's no foliage. The ground is icy. It's very difficult to dig trenches, but they've still been pushing hard forward. And if you stop military aid, inevitably you give Russia an advantage and they'll be wanting to push forward. The last time that military aid was cut was in the summer of 23. It's when Congress just froze the aid until early spring of the following year. And at that time, the town of Avdiivka, shown here, fell. And also the Ukrainians suffered a lot of casualties. As we stand at the moment, the town of Pokrovsk, just there, is gradually being encircled by the Russians. They've been trying to take that for months, but they will see this as a renewed opportunity to get going. And if we go up to Kursk as well, you remember that little enclave of Ukrainian soldiers, they've lost some of that land over the last few weeks and months, but largely Russia's struggled to kick them out. So just down with you. But what the Russians appear to be doing at the moment, if I can move across, is they're trying to encircle this area here and try to isolate those Ukrainian troops. That will make life really, really difficult indeed. And going back to your weapons, you talked a lot about the weapons. It's not just the weapons, it's also intelligence the Americans provide. And the one big thing they provide, of course, is the Patriot missile system, largely positioned around the cities in Ukraine, because there's been nightly attacks at the moment by the Russians against the civilians, civilians in the cities. That's what this missile system has been able to protect. If that supply stopped flowing, the Ukrainian civilians are going to pay a high price.
Yeah, indeed. It's worth remembering as well that pause in 23 was the result of Trump out of office pressuring Republicans in Congress to do that.
Right, yes.
So what do we think his strategy is here at this point?
The difficulty here is I think everybody's trying to work out what Trump's strategy is. What the European leaders assumed it was, if we look at the spending, is that Trump wants Europe to be less reliant on military spending. So on the graphic on the left there, that's how much the US contributes on expenditure. NATO countries, all of the rest of the NATO countries don't even get close. So by that graphic, America feels that a lot of the nations who aren't meeting their 2% obligation should be. If you look at, though, also how its contribution to Ukraine, it's a very different story. This is the NATO countries supporting Ukraine as a proportion of GDP. You'll see here the UK and the United States down at 0.5%. Look at all those countries to the left there, which are spending significantly more on Ukraine. And all of the events on Sunday, led by Sir Keir Starmer, were trying to get European leaders to up their game, spend more. The trouble is, Trump's strategy seems to be entirely the opposite, that actually you don't want to give more aid to Ukraine. He sees if you extend the war, aid simply prolongs the war, therefore he's trying to cut it off. So that's why he's been criticising the Europeans for this initiative. And by stopping US aid, particularly in a heartbeat like that, it just can't be matched by Europe at all. So this feels like a bit of a punishment for Zelenskyy for not responding to his efforts to get a peaceful end to the war.
Interesting. So talk to us about some of the wider implications then of all of this, Sean.
Well, of course, President Putin will be watching his television as well. And we've heard some of the responses from some of his acolytes. If US support diminishes, that puts Russia in a highly advantageous position on the battlefields. We know that Putin actually wanted to take the whole of Ukraine. He's had to settle for a smaller part. If he now ups the pressure and does a breakthrough because the Ukrainians don't have missiles, that could have catastrophic consequences. It's all very well Trump putting pressure on Zelenskyy to force him to negotiate, but those negotiations will only work if he also wants to negotiate. And from a warfighting perspective, you're only normally prepared to negotiate if you've got some sort of stalemate or one side's won and the other side's lost. Neither of those conditions are around today. So by punishing President Zelenskyy, by stopping the aid, if President Putin is not ready to negotiate, you hand him a golden ticket to actually keep pushing forward. And that could have catastrophic consequences for Ukraine as a whole.
Europe too. All right, Sean, for now, thank you for that.